I remember when I first started urban sketching. I had just returned from a trip to London and I was sitting in my living room, torn between excitement and uncertainty. My heart was full of ambition, but I had no skills or experience. I had already bought a bunch of markers and sketchbooks, but instead of inspiration, I was overwhelmed. I was eager to create, but paralyzed by the fear of beginning. And I had already set myself up for failure with sketchbook anxiety. You know, the fear that my first sketch would ruin the entire book. Up until that point, all my sketches were just scribbles on scrap paper or sticky notes. I had sketched and sketched and sketched, but every time, the results were the same. My sketches were as stiff as a board. No matter how hard I tried, I could not sketch loose. I was trapped by the rules I learned in art school. But then I had an idea. What if I did it backwards? Now normally, I would sketch a scene, add details, then add color. This method repeatedly produced the same results, a stiff and uninspiring sketch. But what if I flip that around? So in this video, I'll show you my COC method, a technique that helped me leave stiff sketching behind and made sketching loosely so much easier. If you're new here, I'm Karan, and I help rigid rookies transform into loose liners and loose liners into expressive experts. I always found starting a sketch to be the hardest part. There's always that tension between keeping it loose and making it accurate instead of looking like a jumbled mess. But I found a way to lower the bar of starting. Art is full of rules, and if you listen to the purists, there are even more than you can imagine. That's why the first step of the COC method is to break the oldest rule in art. We're gonna color outside the lines. To make it easier to color outside the lines, I won't even use lines. I'll lay the colors in the general areas that they appear in my reference scene. Whether you use markers or watercolors, they essentially behave the same way. They have to be layered. I start with the lighter colors, then layer on the darker ones. You'll notice I added dots so I know the general composition of my sketch. If composition is tricky for you, don't worry, I'll cover that at the end. I'm careful not to just draw with colors and then fill in the space. Instead, I'm loosely applying color with a dab here and a scribble there. I'm also making sure to keep plenty of white space because it keeps the sketch light and loose. Filling every white space would strip the sketch of its personality and the scene would be boring. So far, so good. Remember, coloring outside the lines isn't about being perfect. It's about letting your creativity flow. I built up the sketch with light touches, dabs and scribbles, and left the white space to keep things airy and full of personality. The key takeaway? Don't fill every space with color. Let your sketch breathe, and it will tell a better story. Loose and lively is always better than perfect and stiff. The only problem with this sketch now is it needs structure. Step 2 in the COC system is outline like no one is watching. The biggest trap in this stage is to draw outlines around the shapes of color. In the continued spirit of coloring outside the lines, outlining the shapes would kill the life I worked so hard to create in step 1. I also want to make sure that none of my lines are straight. I want to be loose. I want to make broad strokes. Notice there's some areas that I don't even outline. Every decision here contributes to the story, and slowly, the focal point will emerge. I'm loving how this is coming together. By resisting the urge to trace around my shapes, I kept the energy of the sketch. Instead, I integrated my outlines within the colors, kept my lines loose, and made broad strokes. See how I've left some of the areas unoutlined? This adds depth and character to the sketch. Each line is intentional, leading the eye to the focal point. Now we have a sketch that's expressive and loose, but it's a bit flat, and it's missing one thing: personality. The last step of my COC method is both the most fun and the scariest. The last C stands for contrast, and contrast is what makes your scene pop. But why is it scary? Well, I'll be using my black marker to make shadows deep and bold. The thing about the black marker is, there is no going back. With the other colors, I could start light and keep layering until I got as dark as I wanted. With the black marker, it's one and done. Even though the black marker is scary, I still use it boldly. Any place that looks like it needs some shadows will get it. On the flip side, I'll be using the white Posca acrylic to add the highlights. Because of all the white space I left, I don't need many highlights, but the key to using the whites effectively is to layer them on the darker colors. That's where the magic happens. The black marker gives the sketch an amazing pop. You can already see the midday sun with such dark shadows. Contrast is both the most fun and the most nerve-wracking part because it's so easy to get wrong, and there is no fixing it. But as you saw, I applied the black marker confidently, and honestly, even if I made a mistake, it would have likely added more life to my scene. Hint, I made a bunch of mistakes. Contrast brings life to the sketch, turning shadows into characters and mistakes into features. Loose sketching is something anyone can do, but not everyone will achieve. Why? Because they won't put in the work. But you've made it this far, which shows that you're different. Now let's set you up for success. Remember those dots from before that guided my composition? Well, those are the key elements that allowed me to just sketch without thinking. And they're actually super easy to plan out. It only took me about 3 minutes to figure out where they would go. Check out this video here on quickly composing sketches on location to learn exactly how I do it. Or you can go in depth with thumbnails in this video here.